Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus in the tension of being in the world, but not of it. And the aspect of this world that we're talking about today is the world of information, of news, of just the constant barrage of updates and everything that we hear in any given day about the world, our neighborhood, internationally, all of that, and what that means for our faith. So that's what we're going to dive into. I'm certain that you experience what we're going to be talking about, and I hope it's helpful for you. So, Steve, we're recording this late October 2023, and kind of the big thing going on in global news right now is the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. And we don't have time to explain that whole thing, but I'm sure everyone's heard.
Most people know.
Yeah. But the reason we're bringing it up is because there was a news story that came out just last week, and everybody's talking about it. It hit every major newspaper, every online source had some title that was somewhat similar. Basically, the headline was Israeli airstrike hits Gaza hospital, killing 500. And
wait, can we just stop there for a minute? Because that is classic, like, news line, get your attention, outrage. You are totally riveted. So everybody's paying attention.
Well, it's massive because it was horrifying. And there were photos of burned out cars in the parking lot. And I mean, obviously, this is a hospital. So you're imagining, doctors are killed, nurses are killed, men, women, children, people who are already injured in the fighting being killed. And this is in a moment where politically in the United States, there was quite a bit of support for Israel. Certainly some people who are supporting Palestinians and Hamas and all of that. But it was a moment where there was this kind of shock of like, oh no, did the good guys just, kill 500 people in cold blood? And it was somewhat believable. There's a lot of airstrikes going on in Gaza right now. Civilians are being killed. There's all kinds of horrible things going on. And so there was outrage. I mean, everyone was talking about this.
I was outraged.
I was too. And then a day went by. Israel denied any involvement. But of course, I mean, you'd expect Israel to deny bombing a hospital. Right. And then, another day went by and some other stories started to come out. And eventually, actually, Biden was headed to Israel. And Biden actually made a statement that U.S. intelligence pointed to the fact that it was not an Israeli airstrike, that it was actually a rocket fired by Hamas towards Israel that was the cause of the explosion.
The plot thickens.
Israel ended up putting out some video evidence to that end as well. And more, the evidence started to point to the fact that, in fact, this initial news report was likely entirely fabricated. And when we went and unwound it all, what actually was discovered was that the initial news that it was an Israeli airstrike that killed 500 was put out by the Gaza Health Authority, which is basically completely run by Hamas, right, who is a terrorist organization at war with Israel. And what happened was there was this explosion in the parking lot. And in the first hour that it happened, this tweet had gone out that it was an Israeli airstrike and that the death toll was 500. Now, how on earth you could possibly get a death toll of 500 within the
first hour
is, we should have maybe had some questions about that. But basically, what was given to us as this fairly certain statement of what Israel had done very quickly became murky again. And it's still murky, honestly. It seems like this was something that Hamas did today, this morning. There was actually a report from the New York Times
you were
out
saying that earlier.
We should question some of the video evidence, and here's why. So who knows? If you're listening to this in the future, maybe you have way more information than we do. But the reason I bring this up is because I think that incident is a microcosm of just the world we live in today when it comes to information. We live in a day and age where information travels around the world with lightning speed.
Right.
But knowing what to trust and what's actually true, I don't think has ever been harder than it is right now.
And let's just soak in that for a minute, because I think that is the emotion so many of us feel. You look at the news and you just think, I honestly don't know who to believe. Can we just go back to 3 major networks, please? It was just a lot easier. I only had 3 choices at that point.
And even if they were wrong, we didn't know it.
We didn't know. Ignorance is bliss.
So here's what we're talking about this, Steve. We're in a series talking about technology, how it affects our discipleship as followers of Jesus, as native exiles living in the world today, in the world but not of it. And part of the world of technology we live in today is we just have more access to information than ever before. We carry around search engines in our pocket. There's 100 different news sources that have immediate access to us through push notifications, through easy, web searches, all of that. And we're going to make the case today that that is something that Christians really need to think carefully about, that reality really affects our spiritual health, our ability to thrive as followers of Jesus. And I wonder if we even need to answer a little bit for people why that's true. Why is it that technology and information is actually a spiritual thing? Why should they listen to pastors talk about this? It sounds like a political conversation more than a spiritual one.
Yeah, I mean, my mind goes back to something, I learned as a kid. All truth is God's truth. And so if it's happening in the world, God cares about it. If it's happening in the world, we care about it. But sorting out the truth, it matters.
Absolutely. And, the topic of fake news, misinformation, those are huge political topics right now, but they're actually spiritual topics before they're political topics. When you open up your Bible and you start reading the story of God and of humanity, one of the first categories that we're given about the battle between good and evil is that it's a battle over truth, that the devil, that Satan, is the father of lies. The first thing he does in the Garden of Eden is lie to Adam and Eve about what they can actually trust. So you might even say that the devil is the first purveyor of fake news.
Fake news. Right? He's really good at it too, by the way.
And that isn't just, a semantic kind of funny thing to point out. Like there's this theme in the biblical story that knowing the truth is essential to being able to thrive spiritually as a human being, right? Jesus will tell us that the truth will set us free. He introduces himself to us as the truth itself, right? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're thinking about your spirituality, don't think that information is something outside the spiritual realm. Knowing the truth and understanding what's real is critically important about understanding how we're meant to thrive and to live as followers of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this from a couple of different angles. I mean, one is just common grace, the idea that God gives truth to all of his creatures. And so even in the Bible, we see in the Proverbs, they're quoting Proverbs from Egyptian philosophers and poets. We see Paul quoting, poets for the Greeks. And we see this happen in the Bible. So there's that idea of common grace, that truth is truth no matter what. But there's also, I think for us as Christians, I get really concerned that sometimes we flatten the truth. Like you read Genesis and you see God saying that if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will die. And it sounds so black and white. And in a sense, it really is. But there's this invitation, there's this desire on God's part from the very beginning that we would be able to discern good and evil. And that includes truth and falsehood. And it's not just simply always black and white, thou shalt not. It's having the good sense that Proverbs talks about. It's being able to sort through information and use it wisely. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, God wants us to be able to listen to outside sources and be able to tell what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. I mean, for Adam and Eve to be faithful in the garden, it took being able to listen to the lies of the evil one and say, no, I'm not going to believe that. Like that is a spiritual skill. That is a discipline, if you will, that we need if we're going to be obedient and follow Jesus. And so if we convince people of that, if this is important to our spiritual lives, then what we want to get into today is, okay, so what do we need to know about the world we live in? What do we need to know about this moment on planet Earth and how it affects our spiritual health? So let's get into that together. All right, Steve. So part of the argument we're trying to make in this whole technology series is that we live in a unique moment as followers of Jesus.
For sure.
And our era today, it's not necessarily easier or harder than before. It's not necessarily better or worse.
Just different.
It's different. And there's different challenges today as for followers of Jesus than any generation before us has had to face. And that's true in all kinds of things. But I want to point out how it's specifically true in how we handle information, that we are experiencing a reality that no one before us has experienced, where information is so readily accessible. It's everywhere. It's constant. We're flooded with information. And that's not something that human beings have had to deal with before.
I mean, it's always there. Like you say, it's always coming at you. I think you don't even have to go back that far. When I was 10 years old, I got my first paper route delivering the Detroit News on my Schwinn Stingray bike.
Of course you did. I don't know how I didn't know that about you.
How did you not know? I mean, it was a big deal. That paper showed up at 4:30 every day. You had to wait for the news. You had to wait for the 5:30 Walter Cronkite,
Yep.
ABC Evening News.
And that still exists today, kind of. There's a few papers being delivered, but by and large, that's all been shifted to the internet.
Right.
So our expectation now is not that you have to wait for the next morning to get information. We expect that we're going to get it right when it happens. There's been a huge, in politics this last couple of weeks, there's been a huge thing about the Republicans trying to nominate a Speaker of the House and blah, blah, blah. But my point is,
and it's changed like every 10 minutes.
Correct. There's been like 5 nominees. Nobody can agree. It's a great parable for the disaster that is the state of our politics today. But the reason I bring it up is because if you're interested in that kind of thing, you expect that you can follow it by the minute. That as the votes are coming in, literally, you're getting updates on your news feed. You're hearing who voted for what and when and why and 5 different opinions on whether it was good or bad or it didn't matter or any of that. Like, we expect information to be delivered by the minute now. And that's an expectation that our ancestors would have just not even understood. I mean, you're talking about the newspaper. Even that was revolutionary. I mean, you go back before the printing press and news was delivered by a person on a horse.
A messenger, a herald.
A horse if they're lucky. I mean, before that, they were running to tell you the news. The news was like, the army is coming, or it's not, or, everyone died, or they didn't, or, but like that was how news was delivered, word of mouth. And that creates a totally different set of problems that we know nothing of. But I am pretty certain that reality of just the ubiquitousness of information, it shapes us maybe in more ways than we realize. Not all bad, by the way. I mean, some of it's really, really good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you can stay informed about a whole lot of things. You can get a whole lot of different opinions. But I'm still stuck on the addiction to novelty that we have. I mean, when you had to wait, you were sitting and thinking about something else. I've heard you talk before about the spiritual discipline of boredom. I mean, that's an unknown spiritual discipline to us now. But everything now is current, nonstop. You never wait.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reality of information being available is that for the first time ever, we're able to use information as kind of an addiction, almost as like a dopamine hit
or a distraction,
something to take our mind off of what's really going on in our own heart or our own relationships, family, any of that. Like, that's a new challenge that no one's had to face before. We could go on, and we will, about all the problems. You said there are some good things. Tell us some good things. Cheer us up just a little bit, Steve. What is the positive of us having almost unlimited access to information?
What I'm happy to tell you that the internet is responsible for taking at least 7 strokes off my golf game. Thank you, Danny Maud, and your YouTube channel. I mean, there is that.
So that's kind of silly, but I actually think it's really worth paying attention to, because golf is just one example. The ubiquitousness of information means that you don't have to pay somebody to teach you how to play golf. You can go watch YouTube videos. It means that you can pursue hobbies and skill sets and knowledge bases that before you just wouldn't have had access to. It's meant that education in general has gotten much, much cheaper. Now, people are going to kind of balk when they hear me say that, because university education has not. University education has gotten way more expensive. But what people don't realize is that you actually can go learn basically all the same stuff that a college will teach you for free on the internet.
Does YouTube grant a degree?
Not yet. So you can't get accredited, but you can learn all this stuff. I mean, and it's really revolutionizing education. Yeah, I think about organizations like Khan Academy. I don't know if you've heard of them.
My daughters used it all the time.
Helping tutoring students that before, again, you'd have to pay money for. You'd have to set up a time and schedule and all that. So there is a massive benefit to information being democratized so that everybody can access it. It's cheap. I mean, even people in third world countries who are in relative poverty compared to us still walk around with smartphones in their pocket with access to the internet.
I can attest to this. Maasai warriors in the middle of nowhere.
It's amazing. That's a great thing. It's a really positive thing. But it does present some unique challenges. And to understand those unique challenges, I actually want to take a step back, because this age we're in, where we all have smartphones and we can Google anything, it came following a few other really important changes. And it was kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire. It was accelerating some things that were already happening. And so I want to go back a little bit further to help people understand some of the shifts in how we deal with information that were happening even before the iPhone. And then hopefully we can see how the iPhone makes it a little bit scarier, a little bit of a bigger deal. Okay, so I want to talk about 3 shifts that have happened in fairly recent history in how we deal with information. The first shift is the shift in where we get information from, who we see as the source of information.
Right.
And this shift is the shift from revelation to observation. So if you go back before the Enlightenment, even 400 years ago, not that far back in human history, almost everyone understood that to understand the world, to understand ourselves, to receive the information we need, it required revelation from someone else, but actually from a deity.
Right.
So Christians believed that the Bible taught us what God had to tell us about the world, about who he is, who we are, sin and forgiveness and heaven and hell and all these kinds of things. We knew that we needed some outside source from humanity to tell us, but that was not unique to Christians. Really, the whole world had some sort of worldview that was the gods are the ones.
The Greek gods, the Roman gods.
Correct. And then the Enlightenment happens and the scientific revolution. And there's a huge shift away from revelation to observations, that we can discover for ourselves what is true, that truth is out there to be seen and heard and touched and,
tested,
all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So you get the scientific method, experiment and hypothesis and all the things you learned in high school, and again, like that's one of those things that we just take for granted. This is the world we live in, but we may not understand this is fairly unique to the last couple hundred years. We're teaching our kindergartners the scientific method. Did you ever learn anything like that in school?
No, you gave a great illustration earlier, though.
So I remember literally, I was 5 years old in kindergarten, and they had us run a whole experiment on how seeds grow. We'd take bags and put one in a bag with no water and no soil and see if that one grew. And then we do one with just water and no soil and no water and only soil, and one in a dark paper bag with no light, and we all made guesses. We all made hypotheses. Which one's going to work? And, we watched over several weeks, and we were being ingrained in this way of understanding the world that you can discern the truth by observing the world around you.
In the Brooks' backyard, it doesn't work no matter what you do. None of the seeds grow, just for the record.
Yeah. So, that's one big shift. And now we're going to hold our comment on whether that's good or bad.
It just is.
But it just is. That's a reality that we all live in. The second big shift that we're all living in today is a shift from believing that information, that truth is objective, to believing that it's subjective. And this one's a lot more recent than the shift away from revelation.
Clarify that a little bit. We're talking about my personal apprehension of truth is more important than someone else's authoritative. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so like the philosophical term for this one is postmodernism. It's a shift away from absolute truth that's true whether you believe it or not, or whether you understand it or not. It just is, to a more relativistic idea of truth.
It's true because I think it's true.
Yeah, that we all have our own perspective, that we all have our own truth even, that we all bring our own experiences and our own thoughts and our own feelings, that no one person has the right to define truth for anybody else, that we all kind of have our angle on what the truth is. And this was huge in like the 2000s, late 90s. Like
young Wyatt, I grew up on this.
This
yes,
is me.
I mean, many a sermon railing against it.
Man,
right?
How many sermons have I heard railing against, subjectivity and how everyone has to believe in absolute truth?
There is no your truth or my truth. There's only God's truth.
Yeah. And the truth is, objectively, that everyone didn't go quite as far that way as maybe all the preachers of the early 2000s were afraid of. The idea that there is no objective truth is actually very hard to believe, whether you have a faith commitment or not, mostly because
it's a statement of truth.
Right. It's a statement of objective truth that there is no objective truth. And so just philosophically, it didn't really hold water. And so I don't think it ever fully developed as a real worldview. But the consequences of that way of thinking, kind of the ripple effects of it, if you will, definitely are still with us. That we value far more today your personal experience.
Right.
What you think, what you've experienced, your lived experience is another phrase that we'll use today.
Yep.
And we place far more value on that in determining truth than previous generations to us. And again, kind of hold back judgment on whether that's good or bad, but we should understand that it is true.
Right.
That's how our culture thinks about information these days.
The prevailing view is, that is unimpeachable. You cannot question my experience of truth. That's out of bounds.
So those are two big shifts, from revelation to observation, from objective to subjective. The third one that we've been living through recently is a shift away from believing that you need to listen to experts, that information, that truth can be found in people who are experts in it. We shifted away from that to really more of just democratization of information, of listening to just anyone, the masses, anyone who wants to share their opinion, you know?
Yep.
And this happened in large part because of things we're talking about, like the internet, the iPhone, social media. It used to be that you had no choice but to listen to experts because you didn't have the time to go to the library and read all the books on any given subject. Like,
They know more, they've studied more, they've seen more. Listen to them.
yeah. And so the only practical thing you could do, if you wanted to learn about astrophysics, if you wanted to learn about the Bible, if you wanted to learn about, you name the topic, you had to go find an expert and listen to what they had to say. And so experts' opinions were highly valued. Not necessarily that you believed it without thinking, but you really wanted to know what experts had to say.
You put a lot of weight in their opinion.
And today, we basically are living through the death of the experts. Because we all can Google any question, we know that if you Google any question, you will come up with 5 or 6 experts who all disagree with each other, and a million other opinions that are coming from people who aren't experts at all, who don't have any education or any real experience with it, but they have the same platform that everybody else has, the internet. And so it's very difficult to even understand who you're hearing from. Are you hearing from somebody who you really should trust or not?
Yeah.
And what that has done is it's really kind of flattened the field of information. In our minds, it makes us kind of go like, well, any source is as good as any other source, it seems like. And so I'll just make up my own mind.
Well, it's also tiring, right? Now you go online and you might see 2 quote experts who completely contradict each other. In fact, you might take 10 and there's 10 opinions. So at some point, we're kind of back to where we started this whole conversation, where you just get overwhelmed by all the information. You think, I might as well just go on WebMD and read the comments.
Well, WebMD is the perfect example, right? Because when you live through the death of the experts, what actually ends up happening is that you end up becoming the expert.
Right.
You end up trusting your own opinion, your own intuition. And so that brings up to WebMD. So, you have some sort of symptom, your stomach is off, there's a weird lump on your skin, there's a pain in your knee, there's whatever. And you Google it, you put in your symptoms, and WebMD tells you that it's because you have cancer.
But wait, there's also a comment in there from a self-proclaimed expert in like Central Tennessee who says, I have experienced this. I know exactly what it is.
Yeah, in the comment section, don't listen to the article if this is what you've experienced.
The beauty of the internet right there.
So, but the point is that rather than trust someone's outside expertise, the burden has been shifted to us. We now have to sort all the information and we have to make the call. We're now the new experts of what's true and what's not. And what I want people to understand about all 3 of these shifts is that there's really a thread that ties them all together. There's been a shift from trusting outside sources to trusting inside sources. So from trusting other people's opinions or God's own revelation or what other people say, now we are the ones who have our subjective take on what's right. We're the ones who have to make the final call because we can't know who else we can trust. We're the ones who are going to observe what's right and what's wrong, and we're going to make the call. So there's been this individualization of truth. And I made the point at the top that all these things go into the access we have. So if you think about now with our iPhones in our pocket and the internet at our fingertips, like when you just load up the information, when the sources are endless, when there's just new things coming at you all the time, and now you're the one making the call, you're the one determining truth, like you said, it's exhausting.
It is.
I mean, it will wear you down. And that is kind of the norm today, I think.
I feel like there's an upside and a downside. Like when I think about this democratization, this broad palette of voices, I love Amazon reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear 500. In fact, if there's 1,000 reviews, all the better. I love Rotten Tomatoes before I watch a movie. That stuff's really great. It's nice to have all the voices. The flip side is, I've shared with you many times this article I read about 5 years ago called The Shouting Class, where a guy down in Portland was commenting on, I don't know if you remember that incident, it was like 2017, a Muslim woman was being threatened on a public bus, and these 2 guys intervened, and they actually both lost their lives. This guy was outraged. He stabbed them both to death. This public commentator, he tweeted about his praise for the fact that one was a Republican, one was a Democrat. How cool that they could come together over that. And he got so much response.
Positive, right?
Crazy, 20-1 positive. He actually tallied it. But when you tallied the words, it was about 100-1 words condemning him.
Right.
So there's his contention is the negative seems to always win, especially on the internet, because there's no one to check it, there's no one to stop it, and we humans seem to have a desire to hear those negative voices.
And that predates the internet, you know? Like, I think that's part of the human condition, that it's easier to complain than it is to be thankful. You know, it's easier to critique than it is to praise. Like,
It's more fun to read sometimes, too.
It's certainly more fun to express, you know? And so you add the internet to that, where we're all given a voice and a platform, and we flood the public information space with negativity. And so I think probably everybody listening to this is going to resonate in some way with that reality, whether you're thinking social media, you're thinking news, you know, any of that kind of stuff. And so let's try to come back to where we started, that this is a discipleship issue. This is about following Jesus. And what I want to do in just the next part of our conversation is, okay, that's the reality. There's no changing it. We can't get out of this world. But if we're going to be native exiles, if we're going to thrive as followers of Jesus in this world, what does that mean for us in our faith? And so let's go there.
Let's do it. All right, Wyatt. That was a little bit heady, but really helpful. I mean, these are significant shifts that have occurred in human history. We talked about this revelation to observation change. We've talked about this objective to subject and the death of the expert. How do we respond to that biblically? How do we respond to that as native exiles?
So I think the first thing I want to invite people to do is to just take what the Bible says and what we know is true because of the Word of God and through Jesus, and think critically about some of those shifts we've lived through, because it is true that they have happened, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true that they're good, you know?
Right.
And so if we think about that first one, the switch from revelation to observation. So if we are followers of Jesus, we need to first understand you can't shift totally away from revelation. Like, you have the Bible, you have God's revealing himself in nature and the written word through Jesus. Like, we don't know anything of meaning, of purpose in life, of who we really are and who
how
God
we got
is.
here, where we're going.
Correct. You can never rely purely on observation to understand the most important things of life. The scientific method is never going to get you to the value of human life or the purpose or any of that kind of stuff. You need what God has revealed to us. And I hope every Christian is like, okay, well, yeah, of course. But when you think about how you're going to receive information, we need to put that truth into practice. So when you go out into the world to listen to the news and read what's going on and all of that, we need to tie together what we know that's been revealed to us with the information we're reading. If you kind of leave behind your biblical worldview and your understanding of Jesus and grace and the future that's promised to us, and you just go out into the world of the news today, you're going to drown. You're going to be overwhelmed with anxiety. You're going to become depressed and hopeless. You're probably going to become angry. I mean, the shouting class, you're going to start shouting about everybody that's crazy and disagrees with you and says all kinds of horrible things. Like, in order to make it in just the barrage of information we have, you have to be tethered to the truth of the scriptures, to the reality of Jesus. And so don't read the news before you read your Bible. I mean, that's as simple as I can make it. Like, take the first things first.
That's a great approach. And I know in our next episode, we're going to be talking more about some habits that we can establish to stay in this healthy place. What about the second thing you talked about, this objective switch to subjective? I mean, don't you think the Bible kind of values both of those things?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I grew up kind of in the heat of the moment with the postmodernism scare, and hearing sermon after sermon about how horrible relativism is and how dumb it is and how we all need objective truth. And by the way, I mean, I believe 100% in objective truth. I believe that what's true is true, whether you believe it or not. But I think actually the church missed a lot of the value of postmodernism, of the objective truth that human beings do all have different experiences and different understandings of things because of what they know, that somebody who's lived a very different life than you is going to understand different realities than you understand.
And the Bible's very clear on that. Like a passage like Romans 14 is very clear that people based on their background, their history, are going to be different. God makes allowances for that, and the church makes allowances for that.
Yeah. And so I think we can actually affirm a lot of the value that our culture places on understanding where people of different backgrounds come from. I think when we're going to receive information, when we're going to look to the news, or we're trying to understand what's going on in the world, we just need to bring that understanding to it. One is understand that one of the great things about the internet and having your phone in your pocket is that you have the ability to go learn from people who are different than you. Like if you realize that you're only getting news from people who think like you and who have the same skin color as you and the same socioeconomic, spectrum as you are, like that's on you. Like, that didn't used to be true. It used to be that might just be the community you live in.
Mm-hmm.
But today you're choosing that because you could go learn from
There's
people.
There's so much.
And so you should, if you politically are a strong conservative, if you're politically a strong liberal, man, go learn from some people who are on the opposite end of that spectrum. If you live in the first world, go learn from some people who are not from first world context. If you live in the West, go learn from some Eastern voices. Like the internet has given us the ability to do that, and it can add so much context to how we see the world and our understanding of what is objectively true.
And let me make just a quick pastoral observation there. I think a real danger for Christians is to say, yes, of course I believe in revelation, of course I believe in objective truth, and you kind of almost feel like, well, I can exhaust that. I know my Bible, I've read it a few times, I've heard the big verses. There's a verse I love in Hebrews where the writer of Hebrews says that solid food is for the mature, for those whose senses have been trained to distinguish between good and evil, and I think that includes between falsehood and truth. Yeah. It takes work. It takes work spiritually, it takes work intellectually, and there is room for us to have different perspectives as we process objective truth.
Absolutely. The other aspect of understanding the reality of subjectivity is that you should come to news sources with a little bit of skepticism, because it is true that objective truth is real. It's also true that anytime you're hearing anything from a human being, there's going to be some measure of subjectivity mixed in with it. And you have to realize that information today is a market. It is in the capitalistic world. People are trying to make money. They're trying to sell ads to make money, and they're selling your attention. They're selling your clicks. If you're reading news online, you're not the customer, you're the product. And so that means that you need to understand that when you're reading a headline, it's designed as clickbait. It is designed to get your attention, to get your time. So have some measure of skepticism. It means that if you're reading sources that are politically aligned, they are trying to stoke your anger towards the other side. They're not trying to be nuanced. They're not trying to be reasonable. They're trying to incite you. And so don't play into the game.
And to keep you coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think getting a broad variety of news sources is one of the biggest tools to have. I mean, I'll admit this. I'm probably going to alienate everybody who's listening to this. When I'm getting news right now, I've got two main sources. One is Fox News online, and one is the New York Times.
You just made everybody mad.
And everyone's mad about that, depending on where you come from. But I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And the only way that you're going to have any chance of discerning what's spin and what's real is if you're hearing things from multiple perspectives.
Allsides.com, another great website. They try to do, right, left, and center. So another really good resource. Wyatt, on the last point, I want you to give your expert opinion on the death of the expert.
Yeah, again, I think there's good and there's bad in this one. It's a great thing that we can all go learn now from all kinds of different places. But when we talked about that reality that when there are no experts, you become the expert, I think we have to bring a healthy dose of humility to any conversation to recognize that we might have unlimited access to information. That does not make us an expert. We need to lean on the wisdom of others who have devoted lifetimes, decades to studying things, to understanding things. I think right now, because you can find 10 sources in a minute that agree with you, it's never been easier to dismiss someone who disagrees with you.
Right.
And one of the best skills that we can have as followers of Jesus is the humility to say, actually, it might be worth listening hard and with good faith to somebody who disagrees with me. I might be wrong. Like that is part of understanding that you're a limited human being who's not omnipotent, who doesn't have total access to truth. Like, the only time you're going to learn and grow is if somebody who sees things differently can show you something that you weren't able to see before that. And so embrace that.
And that makes me circle back. I'm still on that same pastoral point. I love the fact that even as you look at the Old Testament, Moses gave the law in Exodus, and then Deuteronomy means second law. 40 years later, he rehearsed it all, and there's some nuance there, and there's some talk about how did you process it emotionally, and then you get to Proverbs, and you get all these permutations, all these different kinds of nuanced applications of general principles. I mean, we're never going to exhaust it, and when we think we have or will, that's arrogance, and it gets us into real trouble.
I think that's so good. And just to land the plane today, you need to understand that you are being discipled, whether you're seeking it out or not, whether you're being discipled by a pastor, by a small group, by somebody else, you are being discipled. And often we're being discipled by what we give our attention to. We're being discipled by what we give our time and our emotional energy to. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, recognize that the temptation is going to be there to be discipled by the news, by political pundits, by people writing blogs and people writing opinion pieces and all of this. And if you just throw yourself into the deep end of the information without being tethered to the scriptures, without reminding yourself of the truth of Jesus, without having some wisdom about how you're going to discern, you're really going to struggle to thrive.
We've used this phrase digital discipleship a few times. We're going to dig deeper the next time we meet for our next podcast. But yeah, we're talking about not just using the digital world to read Bible, information or read your Bible or your devotions. We're talking about the possibility, like you just said, of being discipled by voices that aren't necessarily interested in telling us the truth. So I'm really looking forward to our next podcast. We're going to tackle this with some real practical suggestions.
Yeah, I can't wait. And till then, man, thanks for this one.
Thank you. As we said in this episode, we are very aware there's a ton of voices vying for your time and attention. It means a lot to us. We really appreciate that you've taken the time to listen to us on Native Exiles. A couple of pastors just trying to wrestle through what it means to live as Native Exiles, wrestling through the digital world that is overwhelming at times. So again, thanks for being with us, and we're really excited about our next episode, so we'll see you again next time on Native Exiles.